Adolf Hitler, a character as complex as he is macabre, is remembered as one of the most ruthless and authoritarian figures in history. While his taste for painting and his affection for animals may seem contradictory, we must not forget that behind these details lies the architect of one of the darkest periods in human history. A lover of propaganda and an expert in mass manipulation, his charisma and control over speeches made him a theatrical figure who embodied the dark side of what figures like Charles Chaplin represented in his time, who even parodied him in The Great Dictator. While Chaplin exposed the absurdity of war, Hitler directed the war machine of the Third Reich and perpetrated a genocide of unprecedented dimensions. This chapter begins with one of his most sinister ideas, the creation of a museum of an extinct race, a place where he planned to display confiscated objects from Jews in what he considered his great triumph. This museum was never realized, but his plans reveal how far he was willing to go to perpetuate his ideology. On the night of May 1, 1945, a radio in Hamburg interrupted its programming to make a solemn announcement: the death of Hitler. Richard Wagner's compositions, the dictator's favorite composer, filled the airwaves, and then, with a cold and measured voice, an announcer declared that the Führer had fallen in his command post while fighting to the last breath against Bolshevism. However, despite the official broadcast, the news was not taken at face value. In fact, it generated many suspicions. In Germany at the time, propaganda and lies were common tools of the regime, and Hitler himself had used doubles on multiple occasions. Was this announcement another manipulation, or had the time truly come for one of the 20th century's most feared figures? Hitler was born on April 20, 1889, in Braunau am Inn, a small town in Austria. His childhood was marked by the abuse of his father, an authoritarian customs officer, and by constant relocations. As a young man, Hitler showed an interest in the arts, particularly painting, and although he was a diligent student, his relationship with the educational system deteriorated. At the age of 16, he decided to leave school, pretending to be ill to devote himself to art full-time, an act of rebellion against his father's desire for him to pursue a career in public administration. However, his rejection by the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna filled him with frustration, leading him to a turning point in his life. Painting postcards and selling his cityscape paintings, Hitler barely survived. This harsh and lonely life pushed him to seek answers in history and mythology books, where he began to forge his fervent nationalism and contempt for minorities. In 1913, he left Austria to avoid military service and moved to Munich, where a year later he enlisted in the German army to fight in World War I. During the conflict, he suffered a gas injury that temporarily blinded him. Upon recovering his sight, the war had ended, and Hitler experienced defeat as a betrayal. Convinced that politicians and Jews had conspired against Germany, he channeled his frustration and hatred into a fervent mission to restore German greatness. After returning to Germany, Hitler joined the German Workers' Party, an ultra-nationalist group that would later become the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazi Party. His oratory skills and passion in speeches quickly led him to become the party leader. Under his command, the party adopted a deeply anti-Semitic ideology, as well as anti-liberal, anti-communist, and anti-pacifist elements, defending the supremacy of the Aryan race and the absolute rejection of anything perceived as a threat to their purity. Inspired by Benito Mussolini, he attempted to seize power by force in 1923 but ended up imprisoned. During his time in prison, he wrote Mein Kampf, a book in which he articulated his ideology and plans for Germany. Upon his release, Hitler reformulated his strategy. This time, he focused on gaining power through legal means. In 1933, he was appointed Chancellor, and shortly afterward proclaimed himself the supreme leader of Germany, eliminating any trace of democracy. Thus began the Third Reich, a totalitarian regime that combined mass propaganda with the indoctrination of the population, managing to establish a cult of personality around Hitler. In his eagerness to dominate Europe and expand Germany's living space, Hitler began to militarize the country and form alliances with other authoritarian regimes in Europe. In 1939, Germany invaded Poland, which marked the beginning of World War II. In the early years of the war, the German army swept through several European countries, and Hitler accumulated victories in an apparently unstoppable military dominance. However, his ambition led him to make a decision that would change the course of the war, the invasion of the Soviet Union. Although he initially advanced rapidly, the Russian winter and the resistance of the Red Army eventually weakened his troops. By 1941, the United States had entered the conflict, and with their support, the Allies began to gain ground. As the war progressed, the situation for Hitler became untenable. By April 24, 1945, Soviet troops were at the gates of Berlin. Desperate and with fewer and fewer allies, Hitler took refuge in a bunker beneath the Chancellery in Berlin. Inside that dark refuge, surrounded by a small group of loyalists and with barely any resources, the Nazi leader realized that his dream of an eternal empire had come to an end. It was in that bunker that he made the final decision to take his own life. When his death was officially announced on May 1, 1945, the news was met with skepticism. However, rumors quickly spread. Various theories suggested that Hitler had managed to escape, even claiming he could be in South America or Japan. The KGB, the Soviet intelligence agency, kept all information related to the discovery of the body in the bunker secret, further increasing suspicions. On May 4th, the Soviets declared that they had not found Hitler's body in the Chancellery because the site was in ruins and on fire. However, days later, Soviet soldiers discovered a partially burned corpse that was identified as Hitler thanks to his dental records. Soviet authorities kept this information classified for years, contributing to the perpetuation of rumors about his supposed escape. It wasn't until the 1970s that documents were revealed indicating that Hitler's remains were cremated and thrown into the Biederitz River to prevent his grave from becoming a place of worship for neo-Nazi sympathizers. Despite the confirmation of his death, theories of Hitler's escape to South America persist to this day. CIA and FBI reports mentioned the possibility that Hitler lived in Argentina or Colombia, supported by testimonies from alleged witnesses and former SS members. Although none of these theories were corroborated, the mystery surrounding Hitler's last days and the informational manipulation by the Soviets have kept speculation alive. But beyond his death, Hitler's dark legacy and the Nazi regime left a deep wound on humanity. The atrocities he committed, the persecution and extermination of millions, and the trauma of a war that left tens of millions dead remain reminders of the dangers of intolerance and tyranny. The consequences of his actions not only affected Europe in the first half of the 20th century, but also shaped the world order, giving rise to the Cold War between superpowers. Today, his figure remains a symbol of hatred and extremism, a warning of how far fanaticism and dehumanization can go. Although decades have passed since his death, the memory of Hitler and his crimes persists in collective memory, and it is common to find references to him in popular culture, serving as a way to remember the horrors of totalitarianism. In a world where extremist movements are resurging, the story of Adolf Hitler serves as a warning of the dangers of manipulation and hatred. The death of Hitler and the end of World War II marked a victory for freedom and justice. His defeat signified the fall of one of the most oppressive regimes in history and the beginning of an era of reconstruction for a devastated Europe. However, it also reminds us that the fight against hatred and extremism is a battle that has not yet ended. It is a story we must not forget, and it should serve as a lesson to never repeat the mistakes of the past.